Clinico-Radiological Conference is joint venture between Hand to Shoulder Surgery Unit and Department of Radiology at Max Hospital, Saket, New Delhi. This video is only for educational purposes. Episode 3.
Hello. Welcome to third episode of Ortho Radio Conference. So today we'll take it from our second episode where we discussed that we'll talk about little bit about examples of stage 3 in Kienbock's, followed by bone loss method assessments. Then we'll discuss cases. Over to Prerna. Prerna, can we just start on the Kienbock's cases or Kienbock's examples?
Yes, sir. Good morning, everybody. In our previous session, we had discussed about Lichman's classification of Kienbock's disease, where we had discussed 4 stages of Kienbock's. Now, stage 3 is a little bit controversial, and it is crucial to distinguish between stage 3A and stage 3B. So coming to stage 3A, in stage 3A, the carpal alignment of would be preserved. And the radioscaphoid angle, which is the angle measured between the long axis of the radius and the long axis of scaphoid, would be less than 60 degrees. Whereas in stage 3B, there will be carpal malalignment. That is, the scaphoid has a propensity to undergo subluxation. So in stage 3B, this scaphoid will undergo subluxation, which would result in an increased radioscaphoid angle, which would be more than 60 degrees. And in stage 3C, there is a coronal lunate fracture, which would be seen dividing the lunate bone into 2 unequal halves. So, coming to examples of stage 3A, here in this radiograph, we can see some sclerosis of the lunate bone. On a lateral radiograph, when we measure the radioscaphoid angle is less than 60 degrees. Hence, this particular case is categorized into stage 3A. Also, we have MR images of this patient, and on T1 weighted image, we can see that the lunate is hypointense, and on T2 weighted images, it is hyperintense, showing some edema. Coming to stage 3B, in stage 3B, there'll be the radioscaphoid angle will be more than 60 degrees, and because the scaphoid will subluxate anteriorly. So, and there'll be carpal malalignment. That is, the capitate can proximally migrate, or the scaphoid will subluxate. Coming to stage 3C, in this patient, we have both the hands for comparison, and in this right hand, we can see that the lunate is more sclerotic. On a lateral radiograph, when we look at the lunate, we can see a fracture which is vertical, and it is dividing the lunate into 2 unequal halves.
Thank you, Prerna.
I have a question.
I think 3C can be better seen in CT scan. What do you say, Amit?
Yes, sir. So the fracture.
Yeah, Prerna, you can stop sharing the screen. Yeah.
So definitely in CT scan, we can nicely see it. In fact, sometimes what happens in X-ray, we are unable to see the fracture. The lucency is not seen even in the lateral or in the AP view. So ideally, we should go for a CT scan whenever we're suspecting a stage 4 disease.
I have a question.
Stage 3C.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Amit, what would take precedence in classifying it as 3A or 3C? The angle or the fracture?
So fracture.
So there is a fracture with maintained angle, as we could see what X-ray was shown with Prerna. Angle was relatively maintained. Scapho-radial angle was relatively maintained, but the lunate was fractured.
Correct,
so
sir.
what is more paramount in classifying such things?
So whenever there is a fracture in a Kienbock's, it is automatically graded into stage 3C.
So this is for all to learn this, that if lunate is broken into pieces, it is automatically stage 3C. Don't go for calculating the angles then.
Right.
I think first episode, what we saw example was 3C. we could see the fracture very clearly on CT scan. So second thing on agenda was how to calculate bone loss in dislocations of shoulder. So Amit,
Right, so
would you like,
before that,
Prerna will start?
no, sir, before that, I would like to show some mimics of the Kinbox,
Okay.
which is many a times being reported as Kinbox.
Yeah,
So,
that has happened in past quite a few times.
okay. So able to see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah. So these are the various examples taken from a very nice article from American Journal of Radiology. So these are 6 different mimics. So coming to the first one, so here you can see a diffuse edema which is seen in the lunate, whereas the morphology is maintained. So this is a case of contusion in a lunate. Second one, you can see there is a angular hyperintensity. These are all PDFS images for just to information, where you can see the fat is suppressed and the marrow is looking black and the fluid is looking all bright and edema is also looking bright. So in this, what we are able to see, the fragment which is towards the ulna, so it is showing the bright signal, whereas the other half of the bone is showing a normal marrow signal. So this was a case of ulnar impaction. This you can see there is non-fusion of the epiphysis. So this is a juvenile MRI coronal view, where you can see more than half of the lunate is showing bright signal, and this is and we are not seeing any cystic change. The morphology is preserved. So this is a case of lunatomalacia, which we see in case of juveniles. This is a case of elderly wrist, where you can see bright signal both along the lunate as well as the radial aspect. The articular margin between the two is lost, and there is some irregularity in the cortical margin. So this is a case of radiocarpal degeneration. This example many times is being reported as avascular necrosis. So here you can see a well-defined bright signal, which this signal is brighter than the rest of the signal which is seen in the lunate. So this is a cystic lesion. So in case of lunate, a cystic lesion towards the articular margin is an intraosseous ganglion cyst. So we should not report it as a avascular necrosis. The last mimic is you're seeing the most of the carpal bones, proximal as well as distal row, are showing edema, a bright signal within the bone. Here, apart from the lunate, you're seeing it in the tracheotomy, you're seeing it trapezium, you're seeing in the trapezium, trapezoid, as well as the hamate. So this is a case of complex regional pain syndrome. So here the differentiation is the morphology is preserved. It is not the edema only seen within the lunate. The other carpal is also showing edema, and you can see diffuse subcutaneous edema there, and there is also some joint effusion. So these are the common 6 mimics which we face when we do a regular reporting of the MRI.
Yeah, Amit.
Right.
Yeah, between ulnar impaction and this cyst, sometimes there's a confusion. So if it is a ulnar negative, then we should be more towards a cyst rather than impaction, because here it is a very well defined, but sometimes it is this cyst is communicating with the joint, then there's a confusion between the ulnar impaction and the cyst.
Right, sir. But in that case, when the cyst develops in ulnar impaction, so this is a advanced sort of disease. It should not be like just only edema. Rest of the articular cargin and morphology is all maintained. When the cyst develops, then we'll get the irregularity in the cortical margin. There will be also changes in the ulnar side.
But will you see any changes in the distal ulnar in impaction?
So in
or advanced impaction?
Yeah, we can see. So there we can see cortical irregularity. We can also see edema.
Okay. Amit, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Amit, what is the hallmark feature of Kinbox that you want to train other juniors about Kinbox? See, is it the increased vascularity or lunate edema or sclerosis?
Okay,
what is the hallmark in imaging?
So the hallmark, again, as we have discussed according to the staging, so based on the stage, the hallmark or the different characteristic changes. When we are getting in stage 1, when we are getting edema, there also we'll get sclerosis, right? But when we are talking about the vascularity, so in MRI, exactly we can do a dynamic MRI, and then we can see what the vascularity which is there or not.
So
Other thing,
how will orthopedic surgeon seeing the left first image where you say this is only lunate edema, not Cain box? How will an orthopedic surgeon differentiate? What are the characteristic feature to tell?
so this
Okay,
is
if
a
I want to know whether it is not lunate.
okay, sir. So this is a
Stage one,
PDFS
stage
image.
one, when
So
morphology is maintained.
right, sir. So this is a PDFS image, and in that case, whenever we do MRI, we do a proper protocol of T1, T2, PDFS, STIR, whichever is required. So here, what we are seeing, so here we are seeing bright signal. In this case, if it would have been a avascular necrosis, the T2 would have been darker. But in this case, if it is just a contusion, T2 won't be dark.
And bottom right image when we were talking about CRPS.
Right, sir.
So as to my understanding, CRPS is a hypervascular disease.
Correct, sir.
There is increased blood flow.
Hmm.
So therefore there is advanced osteopenia also. So then how do you differentiate between vascularity?
So here in complex regional pain syndrome, we'll get this diffuse subcutaneous edema, and this won't be a single bone which will be edematous. So there will be multiple bone which will be edematous. So there will be marrow edema in multiple bones in patchy manner. Anything else, sir?
So you can move it.
Right, right.
I think we move to the next point in our agenda. Prerna,
Yes, sir.
will you talk about bone loss and dislocation of shoulders?
Yes, sir. So coming to anterior shoulder dislocation, shoulder joint or glenohumeral joint is a joint in which the glenoid articulates with the humeral head. The glenoid has a glenoid rim, which is a fibrocartilaginous rim, which covers the glenoid and deepens its fossa. So whenever there is a posteriorly directed force and the patient's arm is in abduction and external rotation, that would lead to anterior translation of the humeral head and would lead to anterior shoulder dislocation, which is the commonest form of shoulder dislocation. So in case of an anterior shoulder dislocation, the humeral head impacts against the glenoid, and thus there'll be a tear of the glenoid labrum anteriorly, and we can also see a defect in the posterior-superior aspect of the humerus, which gets impacted against the antero-inferior labrum. So when this shoulder is relocated, we can see a labral detachment here in the antero-inferior labrum, and we can also see a posterolateral head defect, also known as a Hill-Sachs defect. If the labral detachment involves only the labrum, then it's a it is called as a soft tissue Bankart's. Whereas if the bone is also lost along with it, then it's called a bony Bankart's. So here on this diagram, we can see the humeral head, which is articulating with the glenoid cavity. The green line represents the glenoid arc length. And this glenoid fossa, its concavity, helps in reducing the axial humeral forces. So in case, in the second diagram, in case of a glenoid defect, that is a bony Bankart's lesion, there'll be reduction in concavity of the glenoid, and thus there'll be reduced resistance to the humeral head forces, and this can lead to an increased risk of recurrent dislocations. Another important aspect is the Hill-Sachs defect. If the Hill-Sachs defect is large, then it can it can result in something known as the engaging Hill-Sachs lesion. Now, in this first diagram, we can see the humeral head is in neutral position, and this is the glenoid. This is the articular cartilage represented by the green, and the blue is the posterior labrum. Here, the glenoid defect can be seen here. Now, when the patient externally rotates his arm, since the glenoid defect is very large, it can get impacted or it can get stuck here against the glenoid. And when the patient will try to internally rotate the humerus, rotate his shoulder back, then he would not be able to do so. Hence, it's also important to know whether the Hill-Sachs is engaging or not, and it's important to know how much bone loss is there in the glenoid labrum. So now Dr. Sahu would explain the methods to calculate the glenoid bone loss.
Okay, thank you, Prima.
Before we move forward, just one. Actually, bone loss doesn't mean that there's a bony Bankart. It could be just repeated dislocations can result in bone loss. Second, because of the bone loss, our Hill-Sachs tends to engage early. That is why it is important. So, Dr. Amit, you can continue with.
So in case of glenoid bone loss, apart from the eyeballing and saying that yes, there is a glenoid bone loss, we need to calculate that bone loss, because the management depends upon what amount of bone loss is being seen. So since 1886, there has been a lot of articles, lot of publications and research work on the calculation of the glenoid bone loss. This is a very recently published article, 8-9 months back, where these people have done a review of 1427 articles, and they found that 93 articles were actually relevant, and where there is a correlation between radiograph, CT, MR, arthroscopy, inter-observer variability. So the first row shows how to calculate the glenoid bone loss by the radius method. So this is the reconstructed images and the diagrammatic representation, where this is an imaginary point at the center of the articular cartilage of the glenoid, that is the point B. So it is imagined that the distance from this point to the posterior glenoid as well as the distance from the point B to the anterior glenoid is equal. So whenever there is a bone loss, so we can draw a line posterior, which is the capital R, and the line R, which is small r, is the anterior, and we can see that the larger R minus the smaller r divided by the total R, so that will be 2R. So that is a simple method of showing how much the bone loss is by the radius method. But gradually, when they moved on to a more defined, and when they moved on to CT and MR, they found that the something called as best fit circle method is more accurate. So in the best fit circle method, they have again divided, or they have done studies on 3 different methods. The first one is a very simple method, where you need to do the CT or MR shoulder bilaterally, and the shoulder which is supposed to be normal, you need to calculate the radius of that glenoid, and then we need to compare it from the affected side. But then many literature came up which told that sometimes the morphology is there in both the shoulders, or sometimes it is not very accurate when you compare it. So then they started with this PICO method. This PICO method is a software based method, where the larger dotted circle which you see is the supposedly normal glenoid, whereas the green area within this larger circle is the bone loss. So by this software method, they could exactly calculate what the area of bone loss is. But when in the day-to-day practice, when we do the circle method with the glenoid width is the most accurate, and in my practice also we are doing it regularly, and it is also correlating with clinical and arthroscopy. What we do here, we again draw a best fit circle, which is the inferior 2/3 of the glenoid, which is supposedly a circular thing. and then we measure the radius, or we draw a diameter exactly from the posterior to the anterior margin. Then we draw another small line which will identify the bone loss. Then by this we can calculate the percentage of the glenoid bone loss. So this example I can show you right now in a case by drawing the circle method. So, though this is not a antero-inferior or the Bankard's lesion, but this was interesting because you can see as I am scrolling from above below the shoulder joint, you can see there is bilateral symmetrical humeral head fracture with posterior dislocation. So this was a case of electrocution where the patient had a bilateral symmetrical posterior shoulder dislocation with the glenoid. There was glenoid bone loss is also there, as well as there is fracture of the humeral head. So when we calculate the bone loss, we need to reconstruct it in the MPR. And I'm going to calculate or show you the end-face view of the right side of the glenoid. So you have to select the sagittal image, and then in the axial image, this below, you have to make the line which is parallel to the glenoid. So you can see this is the glenoid, and I have made this blue line parallel to it, and you can see that now okay, I think you are able to see this.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so this is the end-face view of the glenoid. You can see there is inferior glenoid bone loss. There is one bone fragment which is seen inferior to it. So this is the exact view where you need to calculate the bone loss. So here what we can do, we can draw an ellipse, which is the circle. So this is, you have to fit the circle in the manner that it just fits the rounded circle of the glenoid. So here, this is the circle where you can see this bone loss inferiorly. There is also antero-inferior bone loss. Now, in order to calculate the exact measurement, so we need to draw a line which is the diameter of the circle, and we are able to see that there is still a space left where the bone loss is there. So you need to draw another line here which will indicate the bone loss. So 2.7 centimeter is the bone loss, and the total length of 2.7 mm is the, sorry, it's 2.7 mm is the loss area, and 2.7 centimeter is the total diameter. So approximately 10% bone loss is seen. So this is considered to be one of the most accurate method. Similarly, we can also do in MR. So this is the way where we calculate the bone loss by the circle method using the width. All right, so any questions on this? So you are muted.
Amit,
Yes,
one question. Are you showing us anything else?
No. You can ask on this.
So question like when we are asking for imaging, can we calculate bone loss by MR only? Because many times it is patient is also confused why we are asking for two investigation. If something can be done in uh, one investigation, like looking at Bankard plus calculating the bone loss, or and if we can do it on MRI, is there any special sequence or something? Or every time we have to get a
Yes.
CT and MR in case of instability?
Okay. So for the visual purpose, if you say, so 3D CT very nicely shows you end phase glenoid, the bone loss. But when we come to the for the patient to be economically viable for the imaging, so we can definitely do a MR where can the specificity and sensitivity of the glenoid bone loss is same as of CT or arthroscopy. So we need to do a 3D MRI where are different sequences which are there with different vendors. So we can do a 3D thin section, and then we can reconstruct the image and we can get the similar calculation which I showed you right now from CT.
3D MRI can be done on any machine, or it is a,
So any machine, sir, even 1.5 Tesla.
or is it a post sequence? Suppose someone has got a MRI done and gives you a CD, can you do a 3D on that, or
No, sir. So we have
no,
to
you cannot do reconstruction?
no, we have to acquire the 3D image. Yes, sir. So you, Dr. Akram, you are
I have a
muted.
question. Amit, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
So commonly patients report to us with MRI, but there are patients who have definite history of dislocation. They come to us with no investigation, without any investigation. So, which is one investigation you would prefer to get done for a patient to diagnose, say, to delineate the labral tear, the area of bone loss as well. One investigation that you would want to do,
So definitely MRI.
MRI.
Yes, sir.
So I had a discussion with a South Korean friend. He said we routinely do CT arthrogram. We never rely upon MRI. We routinely do CT arthrogram, which serves two purpose. It delineates the labral loss wherever the dye is leaking, A, and it can also help you calculate the glenoid bone loss.
So that is true, but in MR, the advantage is we are also able to see other soft tissue very nicely. It is a non-invasive procedure. We don't have to inject contrast into the joint. So, and we can see other pathologies as well along with the glenoid.
So if the patient has no investigation, you will recommend a 3D MRI.
3D MRI shoulder.
I think now we move on to our cases for today, cases for discussion.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Amit, you're going to start, or Prerna?
So, Dr.
Okay, Dr. Akram
Akram
will talk.
start with the clinical.
I will start. I am sharing my screen. So this is the first case. Can
Akram,
everyone
we
see the
cannot
case?
see your screen. We cannot see your screen.
No, sir.
Cannot see my screen.
Yeah, you share the same window as your presentation.
I'm doing stop sharing and then can you see now?
No, sir. The screen, the
Is my screen visible?
No, sir.
Is my screen visible?
You can tell us about the case, clinical part.
Okay, first case was a young male who injured his left elbow. He was treated temporarily in a splint. Preliminary X-ray that the patient brought to us from outside showed a radial head fracture. I would like Dr. Amit Sahu to explain about the radiology that we performed for this patient.
Okay, sir. So this patient was investigated outside, and the patient came with the radiograph as well as the CT scans. So we reviewed both the imaging, and then we had a discussion. So this is a AP and a lateral view, though both are not ideal views. This is an oblique view, and this is also still a lateral oblique. But what we can make out from the lateral view is, so there is a distortion of the radial head and neck due to a large comminuted fracture. You can see an anterior bone fragment, and in the AP view also you are able to see a lateral fragment. So how the radio ulna joint appear preserved, there is no dislocation as such. And then we had also, the patient also had the CT films. So we took some of the films, pictures from the film, and this is the coronal, and this is a sagittal image. These two coronal image where you can see. So there is a long bone fragment, the fracture which is extending into the articular margin and extending till the neck of the radius. There is complete distortion of the radial head. In this view also you can see some irregularity of the humeral cortex posteriorly, which is also seen in the sagittal view. So this view is nicely depicts how there is complete distortion of the radial head and the neck region. The 3D images showed a little more, the description of the bone fragments was better, where we can see a displaced bone fragment. There are multiple other displaced bone fragments here, and in this axial 3D image, we can see that the radial head is completely fragmented. So based on this, we could say, okay, this comminuted fracture of the radial head and the neck region, and though there is no dislocation at present, there is also a suspicion of a, here I just didn't tell you that the coronoid fragment also the exact in the base images we could not exactly appreciate that.
Okay, Amit.
Over to you, sir, for the screen.
Okay. So when we took the patient under anesthesia, so when the patient was taken under anesthesia and positioned, we could see that there was an instability
in your audio.
We can't see the screen as well. Sorry.
Okay. You can't see the screen?
Yes.
Now we can see you.
Okay. Can you see now? Can you see?
We can see a blank screen.
No, I can. Yeah, I can see now, right now.
We can see.
Okay, so this is what we wanted to show. Though X-ray, it looked like that this is a simple, simple fracture of the radial head, but it was an unstable elbow. So the management changes whenever we see such kind of unstable elbow. Then what we have to do, take care of the fracture and take care of the instability also. In this case, because it was a comminuted fracture, whenever there are more than 3 fragments, we go for a replacement. So radial head was replaced, and there was an internal bracing as well as repair of the lateral ulnar collateral ligament LUCL was done. So this is the anchor on the lateral aspect, which starts from here. Then we repair the along the posterior lateral part of the ulna crista. Then we make a tunnel and take a suture out of it, interosseous suture, and tie it here on a endo button or suture disc. And other thing which was done was that there was a anterior capsule was also repaired because coronoid fracture was not appreciated much, but capsule was erased. There was anterior capsular disruption was there, which was again sutures were taken, and was the pull-out suture for the anterior capsule, which can be seen here. This is a C guide. In the C guide, you can see that there's a drill hole from the posterior aspect to the coronoid. We have already taken these sutures here, which are already taken through the anterior capsule. So what we will do, we'll pass this suture from here and tie a endo button here. So this is what we were doing. Through the tunnel, we pass this suture and we tie these sutures on the endo button. So this is how we replace the radial head and do the LUCL repair as well as the anterior capsular repair. Akram, would you like to add anything?
My question again is to the radiologist. So apart from examining under anesthesia, which is the benchmark in diagnosing instability, can we get an idea of how unstable elbow is by any diagnostic modality beforehand? So it helps us in counseling the patient before surgery.
There's no direct method, but nowadays people are doing 4D CT, where
Yes.
the movement will be done under the CT. There are some specific the specifications of the machines should be there, not that it can be done in all the machines. The higher end machines are able to do that. So we can ask the specific movement where you expect the dislocation to be there, and then we can take a repeated CT scan of that section, and then post processing we can access, and we can say that whether okay in this movement there is loss of congruity in the joint space.
See, dynamics.
Is it possible to do such
Dynamic studies in cases of trauma because of the pain. I think it will be difficult. What do you? Because chronic condition,
Right, so
it's
that will
okay.
be a
Acute
limit.
trauma, asking patient with a fracture to move will be active movements would be difficult unless we are doing in anesthesia. So, is there any role of MR in acute trauma?
So in this case, what the other thing, the imaging wise we could have done, if you want a pre-operative assessment whether this is dislocation or not, so then we can the instability. Sorry, so we could have done a MR, and if in MR we could have seen the major ligament complex in case of in this case where you had the instability. So and you told that there was a lateral collateral ligament injury, there must be a full thickness tear, I suppose. So in MR, we could have seen that. And whenever we are seeing one that there is a full thickness tear, there is a capsular damage. So then these are all the indirect signs of instability.
Hey, my question would be like MR in acute situation where there's a lot of blood, lot of edema. Would you recommend, or will it be like very accurate, or still there'll be question on?
So there are a lot of limitations. Yeah, there will be a lot of limitations to
That is
this
a thing
because
which I
as
wanted
such
to. Yeah, because many times
yeah,
people ask
because,
for MRI in acute situation, so it's still a little bit. There's a question on
so in
how
fact
accurate those.
this yeah. So in fact,
Yeah,
in all acute conditions, we should not get an MR done because it will have a false positive results many a time, and even we will have false negative results. So a complete tear won't be seen as a complete tear. Sometimes the normal structure will be edematous, and we may call it as a pathology.
yeah, Akram, you were saying something.
Okay. No, I echo same thoughts. In acute settings, MRIs are of little use because the amount of hematoma that we see that obscures all vision. So it's pertinent on surgeons to do a examination under anesthesia
Yeah.
whenever we see a radial head fracture to assess
So-
state instability.
So that is one of the things
Right,
take home would be like instability or dynamic things should be done under anesthesia. Unnecessarily, we should not try to do things which are painful and they are of insignificant value. You should always be prepared for ligamentous injuries or instability whenever you treating radial head fractures. So it should not be that you don't have anchors or you don't have other things to take care of ligamental instability. So that was the thing, but that's why we wanted to discuss this case. Yeah, Amit, you're saying something.
So in this case, as you told, you could not appreciate the coronary process fracture, but there was a capsular injury. So there was lateral collateral ligament and the humeral head and neck. So will we call this as a terrible triad? Because X-ray wise, radiologically, we have three findings which should be there to be called as a terrible triad. One is there should be posterior dislocation, which on the even in radiograph or in the CT we could not see. Maybe because at that time it was reduced. Second thing, there was a suspicion of coronary fracture here in the CT. Third was the radial head and neck, which was definitely there. Yeah.
See,
So will we call it as a terrible?
we should call it as a terrible triad because management is similar. There's a spontaneous reduction many times whenever there's a trauma, there's a dislocation, there's a avulsion. Instead of coronary fracture, there was a avulsion of anterior capsule, and spontaneously elbow got relocated. So we did not see dislocation, and we could not appreciate coronary injury. Maybe there was a very small fragment, or it was a purely soft tissue avulsion of an anterior capsule. See, significance of a coronary fracture is not a structural. It is because anterior capsule is attached to the coronary tip, and so that is what the significance of coronary fractures in these injuries. Yeah, Kam, you were saying something.
Yeah, Amit, it is similar to a bony band card and a soft tissue band card. So if there is a bony fragment associated, we appreciate it in on X-rays and radiology. A, B. See, in a terrible triad, we commonly estimate medial collateral ligament injury as the third component of this. However, if we could see an image, the video that was from a lateral aspect, but there was a definite ecchymosis that we and Dr. Vikas Gupta discussed preoperatively. There was a big ecchymosis on the medial aspect, suggesting a significant medial injury.
Soft tissue injury was.
Now the trend is to fix. Soft tissue injury was definitely there. So we call it terrible triad only because it has all components associated, and in presence of instability, we could elicit instability and we could dislocate the elbow. So this suggests there was anterior injury definitely. So all components of the terrible triad were there intraoperatively.
Okay.
So one more thing. So indication for surgery definitely becomes when there is instability, right? If
Indication
there
of
is instability,
surgery would be
Fracture also.
decided by fracture. Yeah.
See,
Okay.
there's
So
a
sometimes-
surgery is two types. Like we treat only fracture, or we take care of instability also. See, if it was a purely radial head fracture, we would have taken care of fracture. But if we just take care of the fracture and elbow is unstable, then we have to go in again. Maybe because in post-operative, patient either gets dislocated or because of the instability pain, patient doesn't undergo rehab. So they end up in stiff elbow. So in such cases, we have to take care of instability also.
So it is awareness that is more important. So we should be aware that it could be a unstable elbow. Many a times a surgeon would excise the radial head thinking it's a stable elbow, and then they land up in more trouble. So we see many cases in which radial head has been excised thinking that's a simple radial fracture, but it turns out to be a terrible triad actually.
So just by seeing the radiograph and saying that okay, there is no coronary fracture or there is no dislocation, we should not
So
just say
you,
that it's not a terrible trial.
No, you should be prepared for instability. You should be prepared for ligamentous.
yeah, difficult to.
Right.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You're right, sir.
So we move on to
Okay.
next case,
So
Lokako.
I try my luck by sharing the screen now.
Yeah, we can see.
Yeah, can you?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
this is the second case. So this is the second case. She was a young female with injury to ring finger some 4 weeks back. Initially treated in squint as the X-ray showed no gross abnormality. Later, she had instability. Uh, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
She came with instability of the PIP joint at 4 weeks. Newer X-ray showed dorsal dislocation of the PIP joint. Then I hand over it to Amit to discuss about radiology. Then we discuss the management of the case.
Okay, sir. So just stop sharing the screen.
Yeah.
So here, in the meanwhile, Amit sir shares the screen. So similar thing was there. The initially joint was not dislocated. Joint got dislocated afterwards. So there was a
Okay.
many times at the time of injury there is an instability, and we don't take care of it, and then it presents later on.
Okay. So this is a
Do we
CT
have the
scan
X-rays? Do we have the
of the
X-rays?
same patient. So the X-ray done outside, and that patient
Yeah.
didn't carry it. I think you
Okay.
have seen it previously,
Yeah, yeah, I've seen
and
it.
then you advised for a CT scan. Yeah. So this is the CT scan, the base image, raw image, where we can. I am just scrolling from the wrist joint uh, to the fingertip. So this is a bone window, and I will show you the. So this is the reconstructed sagittal image. So this is a mid sagittal image where so we can see that there is a dorsal dislocation at the PIP joint. So there is a bone fragment which is seen just above the tuft of the proximal phalanx. There is a defect which is seen in the anterior aspect of the base of the middle phalanx. Incidentally, we could also see that there is also a fracture or the avulsion fracture at the dorsal aspect of the base of the distal phalanx. But this was not related to this because we need more discussion on this. Is I will show you the end-on face in a 3D image how the articular margin of the base of the middle phalanx is seen. You're able to see this?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So this is the tool where we can deduct the images or the things which we don't want to see, and then we can directly evaluate the. So I will just show you the ring finger. I'm just going to. Okay. So this is what you are seeing in the. This is a 3D image which can better appreciate the dislocation in a 3D view. This is again, I'm bringing it more towards the sagittal plane. I think now you're seeing better.
Yeah.
So this is the bone fragment, which is separate from the anterior aspect of the base of the middle phalanx. It is lying anteriorly, whereas there is dorsal dislocation of the PIP joint. So as this proximal phalanx is lying very close and approximity to the base, when we do a 3D deduction of this, so there will be a destruction of the base. So we won't be very nicely able to see this. So in more, but in other instances, we can also show the articular margin and face.
Okay. So should I take over now, Amit?
Yeah, sir.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
stop
I'm just
sharing.
stopping. Yeah.
This is, can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So this is what Amit had shown, that this is a fracture here. Because it was 2 months old and this depressed fragment was getting united, and it was not a single fragment. As you can see, there's a lot of combination here. So it is a depressed, comminuted, malunited fracture. Because it's not a single fragment, we cannot just take it up, lift it up and fix it. Fixing is difficult. So what we did was we created a rectangular this thing, excised all the osteochondral debris, debrided all the articular surface fragments. So we created something like an armchair or like a defect, recreated the defect, and this defect was filled with the osteochondral fracture, which was taken from the hamate. And what you're seeing is we pass a thread. This is a modification. We pass a thread through the base of the middle phalanx. So these thread, they will act as a point to reattach the collaterals. So this is the original cartilage, and this is the osteochondral osteochondral graft. So this is how osteochondral graft looks like. This is a fourth metacarpal, fifth metacarpal, distal part of the hamate. So this symmetry, this geometry is mimicking the base of the middle phalanx. So this is how we take a graft from here and put it on the volar aspect of the defect. So this was an Akram. Would you like to take from here? Discuss the treatment options.
Actually, yeah. So once imaging is complete, we must be able to delineate whether there is a volar plate injury or a fragment which is fixable. So what are the options that we have? So if the patient presents acutely to us, commonly we could go away with close reduction and splinting, or a close reduction with dorsal block pinning. Another option is open reduction of the fracture. I think for awareness of people, it was a gun stock approach in which we flex the finger completely so that we see both the surfaces end on. So it's an approach known as gun stock approach, in which we open up, release the volar plate, and do a gun stock thing. So if the fragment is fixable, we fix it with screws. We do not take an osteochondral graft. However, as Amit and other radiologists would appreciate, the fragments was very small. When we opened up, it was almost like a bone dust. Patient must have tried some kind of mobilization, so they further got depressed, and the defect also became not sharp but oval. So basically it was an unfixable thing. Had the fragment, had it been a pure dislocation without a volar lip injury to the middle phalanx, we would have preferred a volar plate arthroplasty, in which we advance the volar plate onto the phalanx after reducing it. But here we had no option but to go for hemihymenate arthroplasty, which was very nicely explained by Dr. Vikas Gupta. So may we move to next case now?
A few questions, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, this was not a very acute injury. And as you told, a small fragment, it was a very small fragment to fix. But when you take a part of the hamate, you exactly take that much
Yeah,
size
we measure
where
it.
the defect you
Match
measure
it.
and
You have to
match
match
it.
it. You have to
So if
match
it would have been a acute injury, say a single day injury, then would you have tried to fix the fragment which was there broken from that
If it
part?
was a single, if it was a single fracture fragment, we would have fixed it. In acute injuries,
Okay.
many times when fragment is small, we can do away with close reduction because reduction can be achieved and do the dorsal pinning. But because this is, you can say, depressed and malunited,
Hmm.
anything closed would not have worked. So we have to open the joint and recreate the surface because now articular surfaces fragments are depressed and malunited. So if you try to lift them up, they just separate out. So chronicity as well as small fragments. That is why we chose this hemiamate.
Okay.
I mean, again, similar to the terrible case that we saw, we always try to reduce acute fractures and assess the instability. If they are stable in all degrees of motion under anesthesia, we tend to just block to extension block pinning. If they still are unstable, that means we have to fix the fracture. Then we take the decision to open, and if the fracture is fixable, we fix it. Otherwise, we can do an acute hemihelmet also.
Okay. Alright. And so what about the terminal phalanx, distal phalanx base fracture was
See,
there?
this
So
was an
that was
old mallet and there was not much deformity. Patient main concern was stiff PIP joint.
okay.
See, taking care of the non-deformed DIP joint, old bony mallet is many times plus you have a same finger PIP joint injury. Sometimes you don't want to do anything for that because
Actually,
it is already
patient
united, 2 months old.
never reported any symptoms pertaining to DIP joint.
Okay, sir. Because this middle phalanx fracture is very rare, so I need to show you 2 slides on the middle phalanx radiology.
Okay.
So I stop sharing.
Yeah. Okay,
So
so
this
this
was
was
our
the
post-op.
post.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
can show our post-op. Post-op. So
Yeah.
this is how we fixed it. There are 3 screws. And this, as you can see, a joint well reduced. There's no dorsal subluxation. Okay.
Right, sir. So there are 2 different fractures which happen apart from the base of the middle phalanx. So one is the fracture which, so this image is, so I'll just tell you before that. So this is the dorsal aspect of the finger. This is the volar aspect. And the dorsal aspect, you are able to see the extensor tendon. So the volar aspect, you are able to see the flexor digitum superficialis, which is being attached here, while the profundus goes and attaching over the distal phalanx. So whenever there is a fracture distal to the superficialis, so there will be a dorsal tilt of the distal fragment because the extensor mechanism will act. Whereas when the fracture is proximal to the superficialis attachment, so there will be a volar tilt because here then the superficialis flexure and the flexor digitum profundus, they will act towards the flexion deformity. This is the same case where there is dislocation, but there is no fracture. And this example, I want to show you sometimes post-treatment, there is still the persistence of the dislocation, which is called as the inverted V sign. So we will be seeing a gap at the base of the distal phalanx, which is not over middle phalanx, which is not overlapping with the tuft or head of the proximal phalanx. So in post-operative radiograph, we need to evaluate this whenever there is a clinical suspicion of residual dislocation.
Would you like to check in our post-op also?
Yeah, so we can try. But I think in the post-op image which we have, so the alignment was normal. I
Yeah.
think when if the patient complains of dislocation, then only we can do a radiograph.
Okay. So Akram, would you like to discuss the third case?
Okay.
Amit, you can stop sharing the screen.
we finally did a hemi-hemi arthroplasty. If we want to see intraop images, so we check the views AP and laterally intraoperatively. These are the intraoperative imaging assessing the volar cusp formation so that it does not dislocate. The case that you showed, Amit, actually the problem was the volar cusp was not, volar lip was not maintained by fixation. Either it was compressed or some of the bone was lost.
Correct.
So that is very important that we should be able to create a volar lip overhanging the proximal phalanx so that it is stable.
Okay.
So moving to the next case, our next
Sir,
case
was
was
there
a
a volar
middle-aged
plate injury
man with
also?
a history.
Sorry, sir.
So,
Sir, was the
Yeah, Mitch, you can
sir was
speak.
was there a volar plate injury also? Sorry.
Yeah, volar plate, actually we cannot dislocate a shotgun approach. The volar plate is attached to the fragments which are this thing, comminuted fragments. So once
Okay.
you do the shotgun approach, you dislocate. That is why we had that suture for collaterals and volar plates to reattach the volar plate. That suture you were seeing at the base.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
So in acute injuries, we might be able to see a avulsed volar plate, but in patients presenting 8 weeks later, there will be some adhesion somewhere, some fibrosis. Volar plate, wherever it lies, may get stuck somewhere. So it is difficult to appreciate a volar plate isolated avulsion in such chronic cases.
Okay, thank you, sir.
So the next case is a middle-aged man with history of fall over outstretched hand presented with pain and swelling of the wrist. Then again, diagnostic imaging would be referred to Dr. Amit Sahu. X-rays we usually do, but we ask for a specialized scan. Amit Sahu, sir.
Yeah. So just stop staring. So the X-ray was again, the patient had a previous X-ray, and I think you both saw the X-ray, and you advised for a CT scan. So I'll just show you the CT of that patient. Sorry, just 1 minute. Okay. So this is the CT scan. We are able to see the cast. This is the raw image, axial images. So this is the bone window. So as I move to the distal radius, and this is an end-face axial view of the distal radius articular margin, where you can see there is multiple fragments of the articular margin of the radius. You are able to see a large volar fragment. There is dorsal dislocation also. There is medially lying, laterally lying large fragment. So I'll show you the MPR. Right. So this is the sagittal image. You can see there is a large dorsal fragment. The articular margin is also showing the angulation towards the dorsal angulation, and there is a large oblique fracture fragment. The other rest of the carpal bones were seen nicely, and there was no fracture as the scaphoid and lunate, they were all intact. So I think the CT scan very nicely talks about the distal radius fracture. There are few important things which we need to speak whenever we see a distal radius fracture. So these are the points which we So whenever we do a imaging for the distal radius, what all things the clinician generally want or orthopedician wants is whether there is osteopenia or not. So this osteopenia will be there either when the patient is elderly, then we need to see whether it is soft tissue injury, whether the fracture is simple or comminuted, and is there is an intra-articular extension. It will include both radiocarpal as well as radio-ulnar involvement. We need to see displacement. We have to see whether there is abnormal dorsal or volar tilt. The volar tilt is less likely present. We need to say whether there is subluxation or dislocation of the distal radioulnar joint, which is very important, which is because the management also depends on that. And we also need to say whether there is an ulnar styloid fracture or not. So in this case, there was subluxation, there was large dorsal tilt, there was dorsal fragment, intra-articular extension with a comminuted injury. There was no osteopenia. So this is information what I can give on a imaging which is required for an orthopedician.
Amit, can you comment about the soft tissue injuries?
So we can comment. So we can just say, okay, there is a large hematoma is there or not, whether there is intramuscular or extramuscular hematoma. The tendon in CT scan, we cannot exactly say it is a tendon tear or not, but overall the effusion, hemarthrosis and hematoma can be commented on that.
So you have to unmute yourself.
Again, question like, will you advise MRI to assess soft tissue injuries in acute cases or?
No, sir, not in acute.
Okay. So Akram, would you like to continue what we did? Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, topic.
So thank you very much, Amit, for useful information and great imaging that we could decipher. The only dilemma with us was that what to do, how to approach this fracture. So we commonly, the workhorse approach of our distal radius fracture is a volar approach, which is what we followed. But there was a catch to it, which I leave to Dr. Vikas to explain what was the catch in that fracture. Please unmute.
So there was a volar as well as dorsal fragments. Once we opened from the volar side, the dorsal fragments were separate, so which we could assess on CT scan. So as you can see, we tried to fix this radial styloid fracture. So it was getting not very well reduced. Here was a dorsal big fragment, which only one screw was passing through the styloid fragment. So what we did a dorsal approach also. It was a combined volar as well as a dorsal approach, in which we did a volar plating, volar locking plating, as well as we opened from the dorsal, and dorsolateral fragment was fixed with the help of a dorsal plate, dorsal locking plate. And medial fragment, though it was a fragment was there, but it was very thin crust like of thing, which was still sitting, so we could get a good reduction, good crust was seen, and this plate was supporting the radial part of the bone. So we did a dual plating, and that was stable and good enough fixation. Yeah, Akram, you want to add anything?
Yes, you have told everything. Only thing is we have to assess the reduction stability of the construct intraoperatively. So this is how we reach the satisfactory construct. We were able to fix major fragments from volar also, but one of the fragments from radial styloid was not stable, so we buttressed another plate on the radial styloid. We found the dorsal fragment was stable with a volar plate. Nowadays we can catch hold of the dorsal fragment through volar applied plate, catching them through the screws. So we were pretty much satisfied with the stability of our construct and the stability of our reduction. So this is the final image.
During the after the fixation, we moved the wrist volar and dorsal, and again we check under the C-arm.
And we also did cineradiography to see any dorsal subluxation, any residual dorsal subluxation in a case there is a dorsal articular fragment which is not well fixed, but we could not find any. So we were pretty much satisfied after this construct was finalized.
You can show us the post-op X-ray, Amit.
Yeah.
So this was a fragment we were talking about. It is sitting nicely. Articular surface is maintained.
Right. Even the distal radial joint alignment is normal.
Yeah.
So, sir, one question, as you told, now in the cine during post-operatively, you was confirmed that there is
Just
no
like a
dislocation.
fluoro.
Yeah, fluoro. So you were confirmed that there won't be any dislocation, right? So now what is
Not
the
dislocation,
next?
I'll say fracture. If fracture is unstable, what happens? We vigorously move the wrist dorsiflexion and palmar flexion, and still fragment was sitting at the place where it was. So it is very unlikely that this fragment will move, and it has to stay in this position for 3 weeks or 4 weeks. When fracture unites, everything is okay. So we want to give a stable fixation so that we can mobilize these patients early. Otherwise, what happens if this fracture is not stable and we are not fixing it and not stable, so we cannot mobilize them early. So post-op result of early rehabilitation is not there. So post-op movements become little bit less because of stiffness of immobilization.
Okay. So then,
So
sir,
stable.
how will you? Yeah. So
Sorry.
how will you now assess the recovery of the patient in this case?
See, then we, if fixation is stable, then our protocols are fixed. After first visit, when edema swelling is less, we remove the plaster and give this patient a brace. So intermittently, what patient will do is movement of the joint at home, intermittently by removing the brace and move the joint, so that we don't have much of stiffness.
Okay. And we will follow up on routine protocol of radiograph.
Yeah, yeah. So anything else we want to discuss? Prerna, you want to say something?
Or if this patient had marked osteopenia, then would your approach would that have changed or?
No, it is osteopenia that two things. Stability of construct is important because implants, they don't hold well. That is why we use locking plate. If it was really osteopenic and there was a doubt that implants won't hold, so we mobilize them a little bit late. But till now we have a very good satisfactory results with our locking plates. But definitely if patient is 80, 85, 90, those patients, the fixation is little bit, you can say you cannot mobilize them so vigorously and early as we would have done in young patients.
Okay, sir.
But union is same. Like union is not delayed because of osteopenia.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Amit,
Yes.
so in era of digital radiography, how sure are you about the quality of bone on X-rays, on CTs? So how would you give us information about the quality of bone, whether it is osteopenic?
So Akram. So see, we have to have something for Prerna for next episode. So Prerna, you will tell us about how to assess osteoporosis on X-ray and CT in acute fractures.
So I have another homework for Prerna. So the criteria for assessing the same is very well defined in proximal femur and proximal humerus, because we have well defined cortical thickness and we can measure it. But in distal radius, the criteria are smudgy. They are not well defined. So do some literacy.
That is a homework for Prerna.
Okay, sir.
The next thing she will tell us, will we rely on the whiteness or darkness of the bone or something else to assess radiograph. See, with conventional radiograph, it was simple because exposure was standardized, so we could say that this bone appears darker or this bone appears white, so osteoporosis is there or not. But digital, because of you can do the contrast and brightness after the exposure, so it is difficult. So there are, how will you assess on X-ray and CT scan osteoporosis for the distal radius? Okay, Prerna?
This
Amit,
distal
anything
radius
else?
fracture is, yeah, so distal radius fracture is a very common and important point. Can we keep some more discussion for the next
Yeah, we'll have
session?
some discussion on angles and maybe classification also. We will talk about it for the
Because
next
this is
time.
now common in all the age group. Different ages have different etiology for the fracture. So we can discuss something on that as well.
Radiology part, we can angles, we can have associated injuries. See, distal radius now, the DRUJ is very important. Radio scaffold unit is important because there can be associated injuries to TFCC and other small ligaments of the wrist. So we will have a detailed discussion for the next episode on distal radius fractures.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
Okay, sir.
Anything else, Akram? You want to say something?
No, sir. Okay.
Amit?
Finally, Prerna gets some homework to do.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay.
Okay,
So
thank you everyone.
see you after
Thanks.
some time. Okay, bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
To subscribe our channel, click below. For any queries, email us at hand2shoulderclinic.in@gmail.com.